Before we talk about hedge funds more broadly, what about an election year? Should we be concerned at all about politics as we look at the fate of hedge funds coming up this year?
I think it's actually one of the things that's most under considered in the course of the economic outlook. And when we look at how badly the hedge funds did the transition in the last election, it seems to me that you're almost setting up for the same situation. Volatility, implied volatilities in the S&P futures around that time period of the election is not massively higher than it might be elsewhere. Same thing with things like the Mexican peso that was a very lucrative trade at that time. And it still took 2 or 3 days to people to realize this is not a joke. He's actually the president. And now I think, and Tobias mentioned this, if you're looking Trump-Biden, you're looking at one thing, but Biden likely will still have a very left his vice president will be no joke because he has to get the base out, and so you're going to look at a much more bifurcated choice versus a Clintonian kind of view of the world than we had before, and that volatility is going to be, I think, underrepresented in the markets right now for where we are.
So Tobias, Fabio makes a great point about 2016. At the same time, could we ever have as much of a swing as we had in 2016? I mean, we basically know Donald Trump and what he is now.
Right.
Could we really have that radical a possibility on the other side?
So we wrote something a few months ago suggesting that irrespective of who wins, the market's probably going to have volatility. If President Trump wins re-election, I know it's hard for some people to imagine an unbridled Trump because they believe he's that already. But if there's no election again and he says, hey, they like what I did, they affirmed it by re-electing me, does he double down on trade issues and other unsettling issues around the world in terms of working with our allies, et cetera? So that might actually be taken as a bit of a negative. Similarly, if whoever the Democrat is, you're probably looking at higher taxes and more regulation. And again, business community may not be thrilled about either choice. Now, I'll take one step further. If you look at the shape of the yield curve over the last 30 years, and then you layer on the VIX as your measure of volatility, there's a 2-year lead, which suggests that we should have more volatility by the end of this year. End of next year. I keep going to 2020 in my head already. So I think the elections are part of it, potentially. It could also be the economy by that time. So vol's likely to go up.
I would certainly agree with that, but I would also take the other side of that and say that if you look at it, only 19% of Democrats say that Trump's economic changes have made conditions better. So all of the changes that he's made to the structural thing, to the reductions in
we actually have a chart that we can show the dramatic difference between how Republicans perceive the economy and Democrats perceive the economy. It came out of your note, actually.
Exactly right. And I think that what you see is, that when you've only got 19% of Democrats think that anything that Trump did economically is worth doing. 42% of Democrats think that the economy is worse, and 42% of Democrats think that the economy is equal. If you actually look at the increase that we talk about, in increases in consumer confidence, it's been carried almost entirely by Republicans. 80% of Democrats thinks it's worse or equal. And if you get that flip around, that is a very violent change, and a lot of these policies, some of which make, I think, tremendous economic sense, have no support at all among the base.
How much does some of that bifurcation that we're seeing is because some of the policies targeted specifically areas that were, supporters of Trump or of the Republican Party? I mean, take something like the SALT deduction that was effectively eliminated. You saw a significant drop in the polls in the states that were affected by that, primarily because that's what they were voting on, that one particular issue. And they sort of, all these other broader economic issues didn't get the same sort of weighting in their minds.
Right, but when we look at the single biggest issue, at least on that, was obviously the deductibility of state and local taxes, and what that meant is that Trump's chances of winning California went down from 0 to 0, and in New York from 0 to -0, right? So he didn't care, right? That isn't going to actually influence how we do it, which is the electoral college, right? And things like one of the things that I'm big on is there's 176 deregulations for only about 12 new regulations. The OMB calculates that to be $23 billion effect. How does the OMB calculate that is fascinating. If tomorrow morning the FAA banned flights, there's no flying in America, and then Trump comes in and makes it legal. How much does the OMB, calculate the impact of that to be? The cost of sending the fax to the airports to reopen and the cost of the time of people to read these faxes. They don't take into account the massive economic disruption of the fact there was no airplanes, just to name something, right? So in reality, shutting down 170 deregulations is not $23 billion. So I think corporations, that, chucking all of that out and having the party come in, have only 19% of them that think any of them made any difference at all, is really a much bigger shift than people think.
I'd add in Charlie Cook of the Cook Political Report will tell you that 35-40% of people in the country will vote for Trump because they like his policies, and 40-45% of people will vote against him because they dislike him.
Right.
So that gets affected in the chart you were looking at before. It's not about the policy. It's not about the economic impact. It's about almost a visceral dislike for the president that then shows up in, anything he does is not going to help me. And I buy into this percentage data. If we look at national polls, for example, they don't tell you that much because probably Democrats are trouncing Republicans in New York and California, two of the most populous states, by maybe 40, 50 percentage points, and it's getting thrown into that national poll. Right. What's happening in Kansas, what's happening in Pennsylvania, it's going to be far, far more important.
Fabio, coming back to hedge funds generally, though, if there's more volatility in an election year, is that net better for hedge funds?
It's a falsehood, actually. It's one of the, hedge funds have done dismally, right?
Yes.
I mean, I think we have to be,
But there hasn't much been volatility, and the markets are all up. And
that's
you're
right.
Not hedging against very much.
The HFR Hedge Fund Equity Index is an almost inconceivable 2.97% per year over the last 36 months, when the S&P's been up 48%. You have to almost try to make that happen, right? I mean, there's something really not working in that model. And one of the things that I've looked at over the years is the performance of hedge funds in high volatility periods. And hedge funds will tell you when it's, there's not enough volatility, as if they're in there trading away. But actually look at the performance when the VIX goes up sort of to the top quartile. Hedge fund performance drops off like a stone. And the upside downside capture ratio isn't that good. I think it's going to get better simply because you're getting a lot less hedge funds being launched. Anyone who's fired from, the Dunkin' Donuts isn't launching a hedge fund, and thank God for that. It was a period of time when there was just simply too little talent chasing too few trades.